welcome to the deep dive. This is where we cut through all the noise, dig into some fascinating sources, and pull out the absolute best bits of knowledge for you.
Exactly. Our goal is simple. Give you, our listener, a kind of shortcut to being really well informed.
Yeah, packed with surprising facts and hopefully a bit of humor along the way.
Keeps things interesting, right?
Definitely. So today we're setting off on, well, one of my favorite kinds of linguistic adventures.
Oh, yeah.
We use words every single day without even thinking about them. But these words, they're hiding these incredible, often totally unexpected stories just like under the surface.
It's like digging up linguistic treasure.
Pretty much. Linguistic archaeology, uncovering these forgotten tales hidden in just everyday talk.
And our specific mission for you today, our listener, is a proper deep dive into words, starting with the letter B.
Just B. Sounds specific.
It is, but it'll take us everywhere. From, the most basic ancient sounds that just mimic the world, right up to big historical events, cultural shifts.
Yeah.
Even just the weird quirks of how people behave. Honestly, by the end, you'll never look at these B words the same way again.
I'm intrigued. So they're not just words, they're like tiny time capsules.
Exactly. Little capsules of history, culture, human thought, all whispering their secrets.
Okay, that sounds absolutely fascinating. So if we're talking about the real basics, the core of words, where do we start? Maybe with sound itself.
That's the perfect place to begin. The building blocks. It's amazing how many words, especially the ones we learn really early on, are just direct imitations of sounds.
Onomatopoeia, right?
Precisely. It shows this really basic universal need to, copy and label the sounds around us.
Okay, like babble. You hear babies babbling or a babbling brook.
Yeah.
It feels so natural. What's the story behind it? Is it just what it sounds like?
That's a great first one. So babble, it came into English, Middle English specifically, and it might have come from Middle Low German Babylon, or it could have just sort of popped up independently in English.
Huh. Either way.
Either way, the core is definitely onomatopoeic. It's based directly on those repetitive ba-ba-ba sounds that babies make, when they're just starting to make noises, experimenting with their voice.
Right, their first go at talking. And that seems to happen everywhere, doesn't it? Like mama, papa.
It's totally universal, and that's the fascinating part. You see the exact same thing, those simple sounds, repeating them in mama and papa in, countless languages all over the world.
Really? Like in French?
Yeah, perfect example. In French, you have babiller, which means to prattle, basically babble, and maman for mummy. Clearly, from those basic ba and ma sounds, it points to this deep shared human thing about learning language.
That makes total sense. A universal starting point. So the babbling brook connection is that just because the water sounds a bit like that, rhythmic and repetitive?
Exactly that. The word babbling works so well for water because it's purely about the sound, that rhythmic, sort of repetitive, maybe slightly incoherent flow. It just mimics those early speech sounds perfectly.
Huh. That's quite poetic, actually.
It is. It shows how we take these sound-based words and apply them to the natural world, too.
Okay, sticking with sounds. What about things like bang and bash? They feel very direct, like bang.
Definitely direct imitations. Bang is that sharp, sudden noise, possibly from Scandinavian languages. Bash is similar, imitating a forceful hit. And bash might actually be a mix, like a blend of bang and smash.
Bang and smash. Yeah, I can see that.
But what's really interesting with bash is how its meaning changed over time. It started with the sound, the forceful action, sure, but then in the 20th century, it got this totally different social meaning slang for a party.
A party, like a birthday bash.
Exactly, a birthday bash. That came much later. It shows how words can drift, right, from a violent sound to a fun get-together.
I never connected those. That's wild. Okay, what about bawl? Like bawling your eyes out. Sounds imitative, too.
It absolutely is. Bawl imitates loud cries, especially animal sounds initially, like a howl or a bark. Think of cattle making loud, maybe mournful sounds.
Ah, like a cow lowing.
Could be. Linguistically, it might link back to medieval Latin balar, meaning to bark, or even Icelandic bala, to low. So again, language borrowing directly from nature's sounds.
Right.
Loud, uncontrolled cries, basically.
Makes sense. And boo, the classic ghost sound, or what unhappy audiences do.
Boo is interesting because it has that split personality. Early on, Middle English, boo. It was just meant to surprise someone, like boo.
Don't scare.
Pretty much. But then it developed that other meaning, expressing disapproval, especially in public, like at a bad play. And that use is thought to imitate the lowing of oxen.
Seriously. Like cows.
Yep. deep, guttural sound. So when you boo someone off stage, you're kind of channeling an unhappy cow.
That is hilarious. I'm channeling my inner bovine critic.
Huh.
Okay, last sound one for now. Bumble, like in Bumblebee.
Ah, yes. The B is key here. The first meaning of bumble was literally to hum or to drone, imitating the sound the bee makes.
Right, that buzzing sound.
Exactly. It's what's called a frequentative verb, meaning
Oh, yeah.
it suggests a repeated action, the constant humming, and it's related to the word boom.
Okay.
But then bumble took this neat little detour. It also came to mean to move around in a confused or clumsy way, like someone bumbling along.
Oh, yeah, like bumbling through a test.
Precisely. It's as if the bee's slightly erratic flight path became a metaphor for human awkwardness.
From a hum to clumsiness. I like that. Now, you mentioned babies earlier with babble. Let's go back to babe and baby, also imitative.
Almost certainly. Both babe and baby likely mimic those early infant sounds that repeated ba, just like babble. You even find older dialect forms like baby.
Okay, so the sound is the root, but their meaning.
Yeah.
That's gone on quite a journey, hasn't it?
A massive journey. Babe started out quite poetic, almost formal. It meant infant, you'd find it in the Bible or serious texts. It had the sense of innocence, vulnerability.
Yeah, definitely not how we often hear babe today.
Not at all. Fast forward to the early 20th century U.S., babe and baby start being used as, terms of endearment, mostly towards women, casual, affectionate.
Okay, getting closer.
But then, later 20th century onwards, the meaning broadens again, and now it's often used just to describe someone who's sexually attractive, male or female.
He's a real babe. What a babe.
Exactly. So it went from this innocent infant to a term of endearment to purely about attractiveness. It's a huge shift, reflecting massive changes in society, gender dynamics, how we talk informally.
Wow. From the Bible to, well, that. It really shows how words soak up cultural change. Is there a simpler B word for a child? One that didn't get so complicated?
Well, there's bairn. Much simpler story, but interesting because it's so regional.
Bairn. Where's that from?
It's mostly Scots and Northern English for child, comes straight from Old English bairn, with old Germanic roots. Unlike babe, it hasn't really twisted its meaning. It just shows how old words can stick around in certain places.
Like a little linguistic fossil from the north. Okay, fascinating. So we've gone from baby sounds. Let's shift gears. Let's talk about words that echo actual history, like words carrying the weight of empires, buildings, social changes.
Yes, this is where language really acts like a time capsule. Some words are like monuments to past events or ways of thinking, often hiding in plain sight.
And the ultimate example of, confusion and language having power has got to be Babel, right?
Absolutely. The story of Babel from Genesis 11 is just so foundational. God gets annoyed with humans trying to build this massive tower to heaven.
Arrogant of them, right.
So he confuses their languages. Suddenly nobody understands each other, project abandoned. The word itself, Babel, was originally Hebrew for Babylon, from Akkadian meaning gate of God.
Gate of God, ironic.
Totally. But that powerful biblical story just took over. It came into English meaning a confusion of sounds, a total racket.
Just noisy chaos.
Exactly. And it expanded quickly. By the early 1600s, a babel can mean any scene of confusion, like a noisy meeting. And because the story is so vivid, it also got used metaphorically for something really lofty or ambitious, maybe too ambitious.
Like Dickens writing about Babel towers of chimneys.
Precisely. Or Milton talking about new babels. It captures that mix of grand ambition and potential chaos.
Okay, from epic confusion to something more solid, architecture. Words like baluster and balustrade.
Very specific.
They are, and they have this charming origin in nature. A baluster, one of those decorative pillars and a railing.
Yeah, on stairs or balconies.
Right. That whole railing is the balustrade. The baluster itself is named because part of its shape, the sort of curving bit, looks like the calyx tube, the base of a wild pomegranate flower.
A pomegranate flower? No way.
Yes, from the Italian balustro, meaning that flower part. And here's a fun, maybe speculative link. The word baboon.
Baboon. What's the connection? Well, one of the first meanings of baboon in English was a grotesque figure used in architectural carving, maybe inspired by the ape's exaggerated facial features. So you potentially have this faint thread. Flower pillar to work, grotesque carving ape.
Flower to baboon via architecture.
Oh.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown. Language is weirder than I thought.
It often is.
Speaking of building things in history, barricade. That feels like it has a very direct, maybe violent story.
It does, a really vivid historical snapshot. Barricade comes from French barrique, meaning a cask or barrel.
Barrels.
Yeah, the key event is the Day of the Barricades in Paris, May 12th, 1588. This was during the Huguenot Wars, big religious conflict.
Okay.
On that day, people literally used barrels, barriques filled with dirt or whatever to quickly build defenses in the streets, block things off. And that specific action gave us the word barricade for any makeshift barrier.
Wow, so the word comes directly from people throwing barrels in the street during a war.
Pretty much, a word born in urban conflict.
Okay, another building word. Belfry. Bell tower, obviously, but I have a feeling you're going to tell me it wasn't always about bells.
You have a very good feeling.
Yeah.
This is one of the absolute stunners. The early spelling was Burfrey from Old French, and originally it had absolutely nothing to do with bells.
Nothing. So what was it?
It was a movable tower used when besieging an emplacement.
Siege tower. Like rolling up to castle walls.
Exactly that. A massive wooden war machine, worlds away from a peaceful church tower.
Okay, how on earth did it become a bell tower? That's a huge jump.
It's an amazing journey and a perfect example of folk etymology. So from siege tower, the meaning shifted gradually. First to tower for protecting watchmen, then just watchtower, then maybe a beacon tower.
Okay, still towers, but not for bells yet.
Not yet. But finally, because these towers were tall and prominent, people started associating them with bell towers. And crucially, the spelling changed from Burfrey to Belfry because people heard it and thought of the word bell.
So people just assumed it had bell in it
Yeah.
and changed the spelling to match, even though it was wrong.
Exactly. The popular association literally reshaped the word. Mind-boggling, isn't it?
That's incredible. A word completely changing its identity.
Okay, let's move from siege engines to maybe slightly more civilized things. Rituals, social roles, parties.
Good idea.
Mm-hmm.
These words show how language reflects our social fabric traditions, celebrations, even our excesses.
So, Bacchanal instantly makes me think of wild parties, Roman gods, lots of wine.
And you'd be right on the money. Bacchanal comes directly from Bacchus, or Bacchus in Greek, the god of wine, fertility, general revelry.
Right.
It's tied to the Bacchanalia, those Roman festivals for him. They were famous for, well, free-flowing wine and licentious behavior. That's exactly where we get the general meaning of Bacchanal as just drunken revelry or orgy.
So the word is basically a souvenir from an ancient Roman rave.
Pretty much. And related words like Bacchants mean both a priest of Bacchus and just a drunken reveler. Okay. Now, contrasting sharply, baccalaureate sounds very serious, academic, nothing like a bacchanal.
Feels like the total opposite, right? But believe it or not, they share a distant root through Bacchus related to intoxication, but that's way back. More directly, baccalaureate, the university degree, started as the degree of bachelor.
Okay.
It comes via French from medieval Latin, baccalaureus, meaning bachelor, but then it got tweaked to baccalaureus through this clever bit of academic wordplay.
Wordplay.
Yeah, they made it sound like baccalaureate, which means laurel berry.
Laurel berry. Why?
Because laurel wreaths made from laurel berries and leaves were traditionally given to scholars, poets, winners in ancient Greece and Rome as a sign of achievement.
So a baccalaureate is literally a laurel berry degree.
Exactly, symbolizing academic success. Isn't that neat?
It's very elegant, connecting modern degrees back to ancient laurels.
It is, and the word keeps evolving. Since the 1970s, it often refers to exams for university entry, and you have things like the International Baccalaureate now, adapting but still holding that history.
Which leads us nicely to bachelor. We just heard it in baccalaureate, but it has those other meanings too.
It does. The immediate source is Old French bachelor. And one of its really interesting early meanings was a young man hoping to become a knight, serving an older knight.
Like an apprentice knight?
Sort of, yeah. And English kept that meaning for a long time. Alongside that, you got the common meaning of unmarried man and the academic degree meaning all around the same period in Middle English.
So, knight in training, single guy, and academic degree holder. All from the same root.
Yep, multiple threads woven together.
Okay. And bands. As in bands of marriage. We still hear that sometimes.
Right. Bands of marriage is just the plural of ban, which means a proclamation or public notice.
So just announcing it publicly.
Exactly. Traditionally read out in church for 3 Sundays before wedding. The idea was to give anyone a chance to object if there was a legal reason the couple shouldn't marry. Simple word, but tied to a really significant social custom.
Making sure everything's above board. Got it. Now, bonfire. I feel like I know this one. It's from French. Bon. good fire, right? A nice cheerful fire.
Ah, that's what almost everyone thinks. Even Dr. Johnson, the famous dictionary guy, thought that. But nope, it's another case of folk etymology misleading us.
Really? So what is it then?
The literal origin is bone fire.
Bone. As in skeletons.
Yep. Originally, a bonfire was a large outdoor fire for burning bones. Sometimes as part of a celebration, sure, but also for practical, grim reasons like disposing of collected bones after battles or plagues, or even burning heretics or forbidden books.
Wow. Okay, that's much darker than a good fire. Bone fire. Completely changes the vibe.
Doesn't it just?
Okay, shifting roles again. Beefeater. The guys at the Tower of London in the fancy uniforms. Surely that's because they ate well? Lots of beef. Royal perks.
Well, the well-fed part is kind of relevant, but the origin is actually a bit insulting.
Insulting. The beefeaters.
Sort of. Early 17th century beefeater was a term for a well-fed servant. It implied someone maybe a bit too comfortable, eating well at their master's expense. A bit of a derogatory jab.
So it's like calling someone a freeloader.
A little bit, yeah. The connection to the yeoman of the guard only came later, late 17th century, so the term started slightly negative and then got elevated to this prestigious title.
That's amazing. From a slight insult to a symbol of tradition. And blue stocking.
Yeah.
I always picture intellectual women from history, but it didn't start with women, did it?
It did not. Another great twist. Blue stocking originally described a man.
A man wearing blue stockings.
Exactly. A man who wore informal blue worsted stockings to evening events instead of the proper black silk ones. It basically meant he was dressing down, being casual.
Okay, so informal menswear. How did it jump to women?
Around 1750, there were these literary gatherings in London. Salons focused on conversation and ideas, not just cards and dancing. Some men attending wore those casual blue stockings. The women who went to these intellectual gatherings, known more for their brains than fashion, got labeled, sometimes affectionately, sometimes not, as blue stocking ladies.
So the men's casual socks became the name for the intellectual women at the party.
Pretty much. The informal dress of some attendees became the endurum label for the women involved. Fascinating social history right there.
Truly is. Okay, let's travel a bit. Words named after places. Geography's influence.
Yes, place names pop up everywhere in language, often becoming synonymous with whatever product or event made that place famous.
Like badminton, obviously the place in England. But it was a drink before it was a sport. That seems backwards.
It does. It's named after badminton, the Duke of Beaufort's estate. But yeah, the very first general use we find for badminton is actually a summer drink, a mix of claret, sugar, and soda water.
A badminton cocktail.
Essentially. And the charming theory is that maybe this drink was served to people watching the early versions of the shuttlecock game being played there. So the drink might have got its name around the same time or even just before the game did.
Drink first, then sport. Love it. What about balaclava? The woolly headgear.
Named directly after Balaclava, the village in the Crimea. During the Crimean War, winter of 1854, it was brutally cold. British soldiers wore these knitted head and neck coverings to survive.
So named after the place they were worn in wartime.
Exactly. A practical item born from harsh conditions in a specific place. Of course, later it gained those other associations with disguise.
Right. And bayonet. Sticking with weapons.
Simple one. Named after Bayonne, a town in southwest France, apparently where these rifle-mounted daggers were first made or became well-known. Straightforward place name origin.
Okay. Now, banyan. The tree. The big Indian fig tree. But I said there's more to it.
Oh, much more. It's a fantastic linguistic journey. The word came to English via Portuguese, but they got it from Gujarati, where it meant a man of the trading caste, the Hindu merchant.
So the word meant the merchant, not the tree.
Originally, yes. Then, mid-17th century, Europeans started calling the tree a banyan, specifically the kind of fig tree that these merchants often gathered under to do business. You know how banyan trees have those roots that come down from the branches and become new trunks?
Yeah, they create huge shaded areas.
Exactly. Perfect natural marketplaces. So the name shifted from the merchant to the tree where the merchants met.
Merchant's meeting tree. Tree itself. That's incredible.
Isn't it? Language adapting to observation.
Okay, last place name. Bunkum, meaning nonsense, right? This one has a funny American story.
It does. A classic bit of political folklore. Bunkum comes from Buncombe County, North Carolina. The story goes, back in 1820, the congressman for Buncombe was giving this really long, rambling speech in Congress that seemed totally irrelevant. Someone supposedly asked him why he was going on, and he apparently said he was speaking for Buncombe. meaning he was just saying stuff to impress the voters back home, regardless of whether it made sense in the debate.
Just talking to get reelected.
Pretty much. And that anecdote quickly turned bunkum into a word for nonsense, empty talk, political hot air, and later it got shortened to just bunk.
Speaking for bunkum, I'll remember that. Hilarious. Okay, so we've heard about sounds, history, places. What about words where the meaning itself has just gone completely sideways? Surprising semantic journeys, idioms.
Right, this is where you really see language as a living thing, twisting, turning, sometimes reflecting uncomfortable truths or completely reversing itself. Words are definitely not static.
Let's start with a big one, bad. Seems simple, but you mentioned its origin is murky and maybe not great.
It's uncertain, which is odd for such a basic word, but a leading theory connects it to Old English bedel, which meant hermaphrodite or effeminate man.
Wow.
Yeah. If that's right, its original negative meaning might stem from homophobic or misogynistic attitudes. There was also an obsolete Old English word badling for an effeminate or worthless man. It's a bit sobering to think how such biases might be embedded deep in our language, even if we don't consciously connect them anymore.
That is sobering. A common word with a potentially ugly root. Okay, speaking of surprising shifts, bully. Total reversal, right? It didn't always mean tormentor.
Complete 180. This is one of the most dramatic flips. Bully probably comes from Middle Dutch bol, meaning lover or sweetheart.
Lover, you'd call your sweetheart your bully.
Originally, yes. It was a term of endearment for either sex. Then it shifted slightly to mean like a good mate, a pal, often used between men. Still positive.
Okay, so far so good.
Then, late 17th century, bam, the meaning completely flips to the negative one we know today. Intimidating person, harasser, from affection to aggression, just like that.
Wow. Lover to tormentor. How does that even happen? And Theodore Roosevelt's bully pulpit that used the old meaning.
Exactly. When Teddy Roosevelt talked about the presidency being a bully pulpit, he meant bully in the old positive sense. Excellent, first-rate, splendid. He meant it was a great platform to speak from, not an intimidating one. Shows how much meaning depends on time and context.
That clarifies so much. Okay, bastard. Another loaded word. You mentioned its origin was quite vivid.
It is, and maybe a bit crude. The likely origin is Old French, fil de bast, literally, pack saddle son from bestum, a pack saddle.
Ag saddle son.
The idea was, maybe, the child of an itinerant mule driver or traveler who stopped overnight, used his pack saddle as a pillow, conceived a child illegitimately, and moved on. It implies casual conception, no fixed home, illegitimacy.
Right. Definitely semantically colorful, as the experts say.
Indeed, and it carried centuries of social stigma, often used more broadly for anything impure or not genuine.
Understood. Now, boy, seems simple, but again, complex history, especially in the U.S. context.
Boy has a fuzzy origin. Initially, it might have meant male servant, someone of low status. It seems related to Dutch boef, knave, but also East Frisian boy, young gentleman.
So mixed signals from the start.
Pretty much. But that lower status idea lingered in English, even when positive uses like "a boy" or "one of the boys" emerged.
And the problematic side, the U.S. history.
Yes, that connotation of lower status or servitude unfortunately connects strongly to racist history, particularly in the American South. The phrase "good old boy" can carry baggage, and historically calling adult black men boy was a deliberate, demeaning assertion of power and denial of respect.
Right. Extremely important context.
Absolutely. It shows how a seemingly simple word can carry immense social and political weight, sometimes positive, sometimes deeply offensive, depending on history and context.
Okay, moving to something maybe a little lighter in tone. Buxom. We think curvy now, but it wasn't about bodies originally.
Not at all. Its first meaning was compliant, obedient, easygoing. It comes from Old English biggin, to bend, someone easily bent to another's will.
Bendy. Okay. Then it shifted to mean lively, good-tempered, jolly. And only then did it pick up the physical meaning, linking plumpness or a full figure with that idea of good health and cheerfulness. The curvy meaning is relatively recent.
From agreeable personality to body shape. Fascinating how those ideas got linked. And buzzard, the bird, but also the insult.
Right. The buzzard hawk was seen as, well, not great for falconry, less aggressive than proper falcons, so kind of useless for that sport.
Inferior bird.
That was the perception. And that led directly to calling someone a buzzard, meaning they were ignorant, stupid, or lazy, though calling someone an old buzzard now can just be affectionate, like old chap.
So the insult weakened.
Yeah. And just to confuse things, in some dialects, buzzard means a moth or beetle based purely on the buzzing sound, totally separate from the bird meaning.
Okay, language loves to keep us guessing. Let's dive into some idioms, those phrases where the meaning isn't obvious from the words, like linguistic fossils.
Exactly. Idioms often preserve little stories, old customs, forgotten jokes, tiny cultural puzzles. First up, baker's dozen means 13. Why the extra one?
Comes from old baking regulations. Bakers used to throw in an extra loaf, making 13 when selling a dozen. Partly for retailer profit, but mostly to avoid getting fined or punished for selling underweight loaves. Bread laws were strict.
Ah, self-preservation. The inbred was insurance.
Pretty much. Giving 13 ensured they were definitely giving at least 12 good weight loaves. Practicality gave us the phrase.
Makes sense. What about the verb to badger someone, to pester them?
That comes directly from the horrible blood sport of badger baiting, popular in the 18th century, illegal now, thankfully.
Badger baiting sounds grim.
It was. They'd trap a badger, put it in a pit, and set dogs on it to draw it out or provoke it. The verb to badger someone, meaning to harass persistently, nag, pester, comes directly from that cruel practice of tormenting the animal.
Yikes. Another dark origin for an everyday word.
Yeah, yes.
And figurative bait, like baiting someone into an argument. Similar idea.
Very similar connection. You take the idea of literal bait for fishing, mix it with the baiting of animals with dogs, like the badger, and you get the figurative idea of baiting a person, provoking them, trying to get a reaction, like the dog's trying to get the badger to react.
Tormenting them verbally.
Exactly. And slang bait can even mean a temper, like Kipling's, "What a bait you're in."
Okay, let's try a fun one. Bee's knees. Meaning excellent, right? The best.
Yes, but it didn't start that way. This is a great example of slang flipping a meaning. Originally, bee's knees meant something tiny, insignificant, like who notices a bee's knees?
Right, they're pretty small.
But then U.S. slang in the 1920s just reversed it completely. It became one of those quirky phrases like the cat's pajamas, meaning absolutely top-notch, the best, just playful nonsense taking over.
Slang is weird and wonderful. Okay, bells. Bell the cat and Saved by the Bell.
Both from specific scenarios. Bell the cat is from Aesop's fable about the mice wanting to put a bell on the cat. Great idea, but who's brave enough to do it? So it means to volunteer for a very dangerous task.
Taking the risk yourself.
Exactly. And Saved by the Bell is straight from boxing. The bell rings to end the round, saving a boxer who's in trouble. A last-minute escape from a bad situation.
Got it. And bells and whistles, like fancy extras on a product.
Yep, that's a direct reference to the literal bells and whistles on old fairground organs and carousels. They had all sorts of extra noisy, flashy bits to attract attention beyond just playing music. So bells and whistles became shorthand for attractive but maybe non-essential extras.
The original optional upgrades. Okay. Big cheese, important person. Where does the cheese come in?
Surprisingly, it probably has nothing to do with actual cheese.
Yeah.
Nope. The cheese part likely came via Urdu from Persian siz, meaning thing. Earlier English slang used the cheese to mean the best thing, first rate. So big cheese just amplified that, the really important thing or person.
Mind blown again. Persian thing becomes cheese. Okay. Big brother. Less fun. Very Orwellian.
Straight from Orwell's 1984. Big Brother is the all-seeing totalitarian leader. So the phrase immediately means oppressive state surveillance, invasive authority, a literary warning embedded in language.
A powerful one. Bitter end. Sounds grim, but it's nautical.
It is. On a ship, the bitts are posts you secure ropes to. When you let out a rope or anchor chain right to the very end where it's attached to the bitts, that's the bitter end. No more rope left.
So it literally means you've reached the absolute limit.
Exactly. The unavoidable conclusion when nothing more can be done.
Makes perfect sense. Give someone the bird, the insult, the gesture. Theater-related.
Theater slang, yeah. Originally, the big bird, referring to geese hissing. Audiences would hiss like geese to show disapproval of a bad performance.
So the gesture came from imitating angry geese.
Seems like it. And funny enough, the golf term birdie, good shot, also comes from bird being U.S. slang for something first rate. So, same word source, totally opposite meanings, insult versus praise.
Language is playing games with us. The blues for sadness.
That's short for blue devils, which was a term from the mid-18th century for the terrifying hallucinations people got during delirium tremens, severe alcohol withdrawal.
Blue devils, that's intense.
Very. So that specific horror got softened into our general term for feeling down or melancholic.
Wow. And bats in the belfry, or just batty for crazy.
Classic phrase. The image is having bats flying erratically around in the top part of your head, your belfry. Chaos upstairs. Batty is just the shortened adjective form from the early 20th century.
A very vivid picture for being eccentric or nuts. On the breadline, poverty.
Comes from bread being the absolute basic food for survival, means of subsistence. The phrase emphasizes being at the very lowest level, needing help, maybe literally lining up for bread handouts, speaks to basic needs.
Stark image. Bum steer. Bad advice.
Yep, U.S. slang from the 1920s. Steer means guidance or advice, so a bum steer is simply bad, useless, misleading guidance.
Makes sense. And finally, the buck stops here. Truman's famous line. Poker.
Straight from poker, a buck, maybe a knife with a buckhorn handle, was used to mark whose turn it was to deal. If you pass the buck, you pass the marker and the responsibility to deal to the next player.
So Truman meant the responsibility couldn't be passed on anymore. It stopped with him.
Exactly. Ultimate accountability illustrated by a poker chip, essentially.
Who knew? Okay, from idioms, let's quickly touch on some specific uses. Science, tech, everyday objects with odd names.
Right. These often show how we categorize things, sometimes based on simple looks or comparisons that then get specialized.
Like bacteria and bacillus.
I saw.
Scientific, but based on shape.
Totally. Bacillus is late Latin for little rod, and the first bacteria seen under microscopes were rod-shaped, so named for what they looked like. Simple observation.
Direct. And bar for pressure.
Also direct. From Greek baros, meaning weight. Simple connection between the property and the unit.
Makes sense. Then there's barn in physics, the unit of area. Why barn? It feels like a joke for something so tiny.
It basically is a joke, scientific slang. It comes from the phrase, can't hit the broadside of a barn, meaning something huge and easy to hit. A barn in particle physics is a tiny area, but for subatomic particles, it's relatively large and easy to hit.
So they named a tiny target after a huge building, ironically.
Precisely. Self-deprecating scientific humor.
I love that. Blueprint. Technical term gone mainstream.
Started as a specific photographic printing process for plans, white lines on blue paper, usually. But now, metaphorically, it's any plan, template, model for anything. Technical term turned abstract concept.
Like a blueprint for success.
Okay.
Byte in computers.
Coined in the 60s. Deliberately formed from bit and byte, suggesting a bite-sized chunk of data, usually 8 bits. Also helped avoid confusion with just bit.
Clever. And breathalyzer. Pretty obvious blend.
Very clear blend of breath and analyzer. Does exactly what it says. Modern, transparent word creation.
Okay. Ballast. The heavy stuff in ships. Origin uncertain.
A bit uncertain, yeah. Low German or Scandinavian, maybe. Could mean bare load, or even bad load. Useless weight. But the function is clear. Weight just for stability, not cargo.
Got it. Everyday objects. Baize. The green cloth on pool tables.
That cloth comes from French baize, plural of bay, meaning chestnut-colored.
Chestnut. But it's usually green.
I know. Presumably, chestnut was an earlier common color, even if others existed. The name stuck to the original color, not the current common one.
Weird. And box, the container. Linked to a tree.
Yep, from late Latin buxus, from Greek pixis, meaning a boxwood box, made from the wood of the buxus tree. And quick clarification, Christmas box, the gift, led to Boxing Day. Nothing to do with the sport of boxing.
Good reminder. Finally, buffer. Shock absorber.
Probably from an old verb buff, which imitated the sound of hitting something soft, a dull thud. So the thing that absorbs the impact is named after the sound of the impact itself.
Nice full circle there. Wow. Okay, what an incredible journey through just one letter. From baby noises to battles, bizarre reversals like bully, place names becoming everyday items. It's amazing.
It really is. We've seen sounds turn into words, history get etched into vocabulary, social changes flip meanings entirely. It shows how much observation and human experience is just packed into these letters we use every day.
Absolutely. It's more than just learning definitions, isn't it? Knowing these origins, it kind of deepens your understanding of, well, everything. History, society, how we think.
It really does. It encourages you to think critically about language, how meanings aren't fixed, how they shift and adapt, reflecting everything from scientific breakthroughs to cultural quirks. It makes you see language as this living, breathing artifact.
So here's a thought for you, our listener. As you go about your day, listen to the words around you. Read things. How many of those everyday phrases are carrying these hidden histories, maybe meanings totally different from where they started? What does that tell us about how language mirrors our changing world, sometimes humorously, sometimes darkly?
It's a constant reflection of us, really. And hey, if this dive into B sparked your interest, why not pick another letter? Choose a few words that start with it, do your own little deep dive online or in a dictionary. You might be amazed at the stories you find.
Definitely. The linguistic adventure is always there for the taking.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.